great-great-granddaughter of Anthony Crawford, who was lynched October 21st, 1916. And my aunt's home, which was where we had our Thanksgiving dinners and Christmases, she owned the largest photograph of him in a permanent space over the dinner table. And they always pointed to him and said, walk with a sense of pride, because Grandpa Crawford stuck up for his rights to the time of his death. As a child, when we were told the story of Grandpa Crawford, he's like a king almost. We were told that he was born enslaved and had worked his way up to owning property and was wealthy. He started a school for the black children in Abbeville. He was the president of the Black Masons of South Carolina. And at the time of his death, Grandpa Crawford owned 427 acres of prime cotton land. So one day in 1916, it was a Saturday morning, Grandpa Crawford went to town to sell cotton seed, and they offered him 85 cents per unit. It was worth more. He said, give me my damn cotton seed back, and was arrested for cursing a white man. Word had gotten around town that Anthony Crawford had started acting uppity. And so about 400 people gathered, taking Grandpa out of the jail. They stabbed him, beat him, tied him to the back of the buggy and drug that around town to the county fairgrounds. They hung him there and riddled his body with 200 bullets. The last thing he said was, I thought I was a good citizen and give my bank book to my children. The family tried to retrieve the body and were told to leave it there. So if you could imagine your grandfather being at home eating breakfast with the children, laughing, and then all of a sudden he's hanging from a tree with 200 bullets in him, that's a form of terrorism. And then there was an ad taken in the newspaper by white citizens. And they said that the Crawford family needed to leave the state of South Carolina, otherwise everybody's life was in danger. My great-great-uncle, Walter, Grandpa's oldest son, wrote Governor Richard I. Manning and asked him for protection. Governor Manning wrote back and said while he deplored the lynching, he could not guarantee our safety. So my family didn't leave the South. They were chased away from the South. We moved to Evanston, Illinois, and not only did the Crawfords leave, but half of the black population of Abbeville was gone within the next 10 years. I haven't spent a lot of time in the South. The first time I went to Abbeville was the first time I could understand what 427 acres looks like. And that's when I think I got really offended. That's the day I became an activist. I came home and I started writing congressmen. And I'm saying, do you know their family was kicked off this property for this? These are unsolved murders. And people who benefited from lynchings, their families are still alive. And they're still benefiting financial rewards from the land of our ancestors. And that just seems a shame. So from Grandpa to Emmett to Trayvon, the trajectory of lynching history has shifted over time in America. Because when Grandpa was killed in 1916, there was no charges brought and no trial. In 1955, Emmett Till's murder, there was a trial but no convictions. And then Trayvon Martin, now you have a trial and a not guilty verdict. So all the time you have dead black bodies and nobody's ever convicted for the murders. On the 100th anniversary of Grandpa Crawford's lynching, we went back to Abbeville. Over 200 family members came from all over the United States to help unveil the marker dedicated to Grandpa Crawford's lynching. And I remember Grandpa's granddaughter, one of the only living grandchildren, was next to me in a wheelchair. And when we took the cover off of the marker, she looked at the picture of him. I saw her face light up, and I heard her say, my, my, my. And to watch her enjoy that moment, that meant the world to me.
How did you first hear the story of your great-great-grandfather?
In my aunt's home, there's a big picture of him, and he just looked so dignified. In addition to that, my school was being integrated, but I would go home and my grandfather would talk about how much he hated white people. So he sat down and told me the story of Grandpa Crawford.
What did he say?
He said that, you know, your great-great-grandfather was lynched. And I go, what's a lynching? And then he proceeded to tell me what happened to him.
How old were you?
I was probably in kindergarten. Yeah. After he got older in the family, you were handed the story, which was the NAACP investigation. And you're also told to walk with your head up, that you come from good stock. And of course, these things don't mean a lot, but you know you're not to bring any shame upon the family because you are a Crawford. You're someone special.
Was this something that your family talked about a lot?
Yes. At my generation, yes, we can talk about it. But for the first generation of children, Anthony Crawford's children that it affected, they couldn't talk about it. It was too painful. They lost so much and were run out of town. So they had to start all over again. And from what I understand, talking about it was very painful for them.
Tell me about it. Tell me what happened, what led to the lynching.
Yes, Grandpa Crawford was able to accumulate 427 acres of prime cotton land. In addition to that, he was the president of the Black Masons of South Carolina. He started a school on his land called the Abbeville School for black children. He was a voter. He served on the federal jury and started a union of black farmers. So he was just a very prosperous man. He also had 13 children who all lived on his property and worked for him and had their own homes. Well, October 21st, 1916, Grandpa Crawford went to downtown Abbeville, South Carolina, to sell his cottonseed. He stood in line with the rest of the farmers, but when he got to the front of the line, W.D. Barksdale, who was the storekeeper, offered Grandpa Crawford 85 cents for his cottonseed when it was really worth 90 cents.
This was a white man?
It was. Grandpa Crawford told Mr. Barksdale that he was cheating him, and Mr. Barksdale called Grandpa Crawford a liar. At that point, someone else in the store, he came after Grandpa Crawford, and he fought them. In fact, he fought with 12 people backing out of the store and toward the square. But a sheriff had arrested him for cursing a white man. He was taken to jail.
We've heard so much about lynchings that usually arise out of a black man whistling at a white woman in the case of Emmett Till or other cases. In this case, this was about property. This was about land. This was about resources.
Yes.
Very different.
Well, no. I don't think so. No. I think that if you really do the research, you're going to find that a lot of people who were lynched were community leaders, business owners, people who threatened the ethos of white supremacy, people who were going to be respected. And these are the people that were lynched.
So how many people were involved in this lynching, and how did it occur?
The governor's report says 400 people, but what they did was probably it gotten up to be about 200 people when Grandpa Crawford was finally taken from the jail. He was, the jail was overtaken from the sheriff. He was drugged down the stairs to the back of a buggy.
And he was killed. He was hanged, he was shot.
He was stabbed, beaten, and hung from a tree. And his children were ordered to leave town, and they had to start all over again, wherever they ended up. Sorry.
So all the land that he owned went away. The family inherited nothing. How did the community react of Abbeville?
A lot of blacks in Abbeville left.
Because they felt unsafe there?
That's right. If Anthony Crawford were lynched like that, then how safe are the rest of us?
In 1990,
yes,
you decided to visit the scene of the lynching.
I did.
What was that like?
It was mixed feelings. I was so excited to find out I have family members in Abbeville and surrounding areas, and I was going to finally have an opportunity to meet everyone. I was surprised at the number of us that were there, but I remember driving in from Anderson, South Carolina, which is the largest town close to Abbeville, and it's a two-lane highway which goes into Abbeville. I also remember it being very, very hot that day, and I just became very aware that, you know, that's where 20,000 slaves once lived, and I could just look out in the fields and see pregnant women and children and men out there working in the hot sun, and here I am in this air-conditioned car. And then I became aware of what had happened there, the history there. And then I felt terror for some reason. I felt a little better once I got to the town square and met my cousin, but it was just, you know, it was a surreal feeling for me that day.
And when you met your family and your relatives down there, were they still talking about it? Did they still, those who remain?
Yes, it was still the #1 subject. And it still is today at our family reunion. Some 15 years later, it's the #1 subject for the Crawford family.
After 200 efforts over the years to try to do this, finally this is on the floor of the Senate.
Yes.
In part because of your efforts, why didn't you just walk away from it? It would have been so easy just to say, well, that's part of history, but this is now.
It's not easy for a Crawford. None of us have walked away from this. Never. We were told to never do that, to honor Grandpa Crawford. And when you see his picture, you're going to see he's a very dignified man, and he died for us. And so when he said, give my bank book to my children, that meant not only his bank book, but his heritage, and we are to honor that and talk about it as much as we can.
Are you surprised that the Senate is acting on this now?
I'm not surprised by anything anymore. No, this, again, Grandpa Crawford's blood has never dried, and as far as we're concerned, we were going to get something for this, vindication, apologies. This is something we prayed for, and so we are not surprised that our prayers are being answered.
What do you get out of this? Well, if they decide to pass this on a voice vote, it's a hugely symbolic act. What difference does it make?
I mean, for a victim, it makes a difference when someone apologizes for something that they could have done something about. You know, if you don't, you have blood on your hands, and it's never too late to make amends.
What do you say to people who say, let's move on, that was then, this is now?
I would say that because of Anthony Crawford's demise, someone got rich, and the Crawford family suffered behind that. And so that needs to be discussed.
And how does that get discussed?
One way is to start with this apology from the United States Senate, but certainly we'd like to sit down with the state of South Carolina and hear an apology from them, the city of Abbeville, and possibly people who know that their families were involved in this.
What do you say to people who say that an apology is not enough?
I would say that we need to start with an apology, and then perhaps, if you admit that you're wrong, perhaps you're open to dialogue about some of the other atrocities that have happened and how they affect people. But I certainly think it's okay to start with the apology.
Doria D. Johnson, thank you so much for telling us your story.
Okay, thank you very much for having me.
No more of this.
Terrorizing the black community, white mob lynched more than 4,000 black people. 4,000 black people. 4,000 black people in the South between 1877 and 1950, and more than 180 of them were killed in South Carolina. As you witness the bringing of these vessels of soil for holy consecration, may you declare yourself a repairer of the breach, an instrument of reparatory justice that declares never again we are standing on holy ground.
It was moving to stick our hands in that dirt and to look at actual soil that holds too many people's DNA. I think is a powerful way of symbolizing the history of lynching in the United States.
And if we start telling the truth about our history, we could actually change the climate for freedom in this country. I don't think slavery ended in 1865. I think it just evolved. It turned into decades of terrorism. We're here today because there was terror in this region. Black people were pulled out of their homes. They were burned alive. They were murdered. They were hung. They were beat. They were shot. And that terror has to be acknowledged.
Exactly.
Yes.
This landscape is littered with the iconography of the Confederacy. It is a false story. It is an incomplete story. We're changing that today. And we have to change it because something important happened here. 100 years ago, a man named Anthony Crawford, a strong man, a faithful man, but because he insisted on fairness, a lot of people didn't like that he was doing well. They didn't like that he could sell food and cotton to white merchants. And one day when he was being confronted by someone who wanted to buy his product for less than was fair, they actually arrested him because they couldn't allow a proud, strong, prosperous black man to stand up for fairness. And that wasn't enough. A mob of 300 people came to the jail to pull him out. A trial wasn't going to be good enough. And they took this man out of the jail and they actually dragged his body through this community. And then they took him to a spot and they weren't content to just beat him. They weren't content to just hang him. They shot his body 200 times. When the family, the grieving family whose descendants are here today, just wanted to reclaim their grandfather, the people in control said, no, we're going to let that body hang there for a few days just as a statement to all the black people in this region. And that family had to flee, and it was an injury. It was a burden. It was an assault. And today we are here to give voice to that hardship. But more than that, we are here to give witness to the importance of what can happen when we come together and say, I'm here. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do to be truth tellers, to be witnesses for justice, is to gather in a place like this and say, I'm here. This marker is a story about hardship. It is a story about bruising and cutting and suffering. But when we get together, when we say we are here, when we join together in truth telling, we turn those cuts, those bruises, those scars into medals of honor. This is the most honorable place in Abbeville, South Carolina. We are here!
We were banished. We were ordered out of town. To stand there when everybody was gathered, and I could look out in that crowd and think about how many people got in their cars, how many people got on airplanes, to stand at that moment with the Crawford family as we pulled the cover off of history. America is a place where symbols are important, where markers are important.
And that's a beautiful thing.
When you read that text on that marker, it's the truth. And so where he died in an extra legal murder, we have come back with an answer to that that's permanent. That's a permanent marker. If you go do business in City Hall, if you go do business at the courthouse, you walk right past Anthony Crawford. And he's looking back at you. So the marker being in Abbeville is important because the story has been denied for so long. But now, if you go to Abbeville City Hall to do business, you have to walk right past Anthony Crawford to do it. You can't bypass him anymore.